The history of black unions in South Africa goes back over 70 years. Since then, the growth of unions has been interrupted and then revived many times.
Capitalism helps us in that in factories and in mines, capital is able to bring people together. And once people are brought together, the need to be organized, to be united, and to take action collectively immediately arises.
This film focuses on the recent history that has led to the building of a union federation, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, with over 1 million members. Cosatu owes much to the history of previous union movements, from the Industrial Commercial Union through to the 1950s and SACTU.
After the banning of the African National Congress, the suppression of SACTU, there was to some extent a lull. And we are told that there was a boom in the country, and obviously we saw that boom. But there was nothing that workers could get, that workers gained out of the boom that existed in the country. It's only the bosses that did. And I think they underestimated the power of the workers. They underestimated the consciousness of workers.
In 1973 in Durban, 61,000 workers went out on strike demanding higher wages.
All the strikes in 73 in Durban, or in the greater Durban area down the Natal, were illegal. The black workers were not allowed to strike, they were not allowed to engage in work stoppages, and yet they did so. And when they did so, the law or the authorities were actually powerless to act against them. How do you take action against 10 or 15,000 people being on strike?
What we had was a spontaneous explosion of workers' anger at being unable to earn wages that could enable them to survive. I think the most striking characteristic of the 1973 strikes was the militancy of workers who, though unorganized, set in motion a tradition that carries in Cosatu up to today.
These strikes signaled that the rebirth of black trade unionism was underway. Workers flocked to advice bureaus across the country. A number of industrial unions were launched and an elected worker leadership began to emerge.
That period also was an increasingly intense political period. You had growing political activism. The state was really trying to clamp down, and I think you had to be a particularly short-sighted clot to not realize that the greater the unity, the stronger you were. You know?
And everyone was aware that there has to be some kind of an organization that would address some of the problems, not only at the workplaces, but also in the communities in which we live. Because in 1979, we saw the formation of FOSATU, which is the Federation of the South African Trade Unions.
FOSATU brought together 45,000 workers organized in 12 industrial unions. It pioneered the principle of direct worker control, building strong shop floor organization and achieving recognition at plant level.
FOSATU itself, I think, played a leading role in helping towards the formation of Cosatu, in that it initiated talks with independent progressive unions that existed at the time. And that started the unity talks, which was to last for another close on to 4.5 years.
Many different union traditions participated in the unity talks. The East London-based SAU, the Black Consciousness Federation KUSA, and other independent unions tried to agree on the launch of a new federation.
There were differences on very many points. But I think what forced the issue on us was that a recognition that there was more that unites us than divides us.
As we moved towards the formation of Cosatu, this was the primary objective that all of us had, that Cosatu must eventually emerge as a strong federation which could unite workers and channel all the energies, both political as well as industrial energies of workers, in challenging apartheid and making sure that we bury it finally.
In December 1985, after a year and a half of township uprisings, Cosatu was launched. In clashes with security forces, hundreds of residents had been killed. Workers from around the country brought the militant mood of the townships to Cosatu's launching Congress.
We launched in the middle of a state of emergency, and that had a direct impact on the policies of us as a trade union movement, particularly in terms of how we developed our political policy.
What we have to make clear to all and sundry is that a giant has risen, and this giant is going to confront all and sundry who seek and want to stand in its way.
Now, we didn't know anything about what was happening. We are going there to this wonderful meeting to Durban, the sea, you know. Now, a lot of people were there, and all kinds of T-shirts were there, the Mandela T-shirts and everything. Now come this tall Indian, which is now the secretary, is talking now. I ask myself, who is this Indian? Then he was talking of helmet call. Now, we learned a lot of things, but it was quite important for us. But the most wonderful thing that was there was the president's speech. It was quite good.
P.W. Porter, usulakile emsebenzini wakhe. Ngoko khulula uNelson Mandela azoba state president.
That was something that I personally had never dreamed that I would ever hear in a public meeting, really. You know, the attack on the states, you know, it brought up another dimension of our struggle. Some of us started realizing that now this could be, you know, an alternative political organizations for us. It became a platform.
And that in itself drew thousands of workers into our ranks, so that Cosatu, from its inception with 400,000 members, moved to 1 million members in a very short space of time. In fact, one of the most rapid growths in the trade union movement in the whole world.
I think the significance of that launch is that it began to say to people of South Africa that the struggle in the country, it's not only about the national liberation, but it is also a class struggle. And there is a need for that class to realize and be conscious about that.
Many of the speeches stressed a theme which I think captured something about Cosatu, which was going to make it very important, and which was a strong, assertive position for the working class. Argue that the working class must take leadership, must be active, and that's carried through Cosatu, that the working class, or the organized workers in the trade union movement, shouldn't be shy to take up issues for the broader working class. I think that was important.
We brought together the unions in 1985. In 1986, we were still attempting to achieve some organizational cohesion. For example, merging the 33 unions into the present number of unions. The most significant impact we had in that period obviously was May Day. And May Day was won in 1986 because in spite of the opposition of the government and in spite of the opposition of employers, we took May Day. More than 3 million workers participated in the stay-away that was spearheaded by Cosatu.
On June the 12th, 1986, the second state of emergency was declared. Security forces raided homes and offices, arresting thousands of community activists, workers, and trade unionists.
We believe the police have sealed off all the trade union offices where trade unions are located. That includes Cosatu's head office and so forth. The objective seems to deny anyone access to the premises and deny anyone to leave the area. At the moment, what's happened is they're actually searching the NUM offices, raiding the place. Again, it's unclear what the rationale for this is, although it seems it's part of a program to clamp down on trade unionists in South Africa.
We had the full weight of repression of the state unleashed against Cosatu. And I think that in '86, we were not really prepared for the repression that came. And there were some mistakes that we made. For example, calling the stay-away on July the 14th, 1986, without doing a proper analysis of our organizational strength. There was a need for us to refocus our attention on building the organization, which was an important part of the work we did. But I think it was the work that we did in that period of 1986 that led to 1987 really being the year of the organized working class.
Cosatu became much more prominent during the 1987 period, when there were many strikes, historic strikes, I should say, that were led by Cosatu unions. In the railways, we had the strike that was led by SARU. In the commercial sector, we had a strike that was led by Kawusa, the now Sakau. And in the mines, we had the strike that was led by the NUM.
Fighting for our rights in this land. We're fighting for democracy. We are fighting for our freedom forever.
Our members were fighting for a living wage. They were saying now that we've got a right to organize ourselves, we've got a right to belong to union, and already we have formed unions, we have formed the federation. It is time that we begin to demand what is rightfully ours. And, the bosses, because they were used to this cheap labor system, they were resisting in paying workers what was supposed to be the living wage. And obviously there was the conflict. And there was no way that strike could be avoided.
Kawusa won the first victory of the year, settling a strike at OK after 77 long days. This strike set the tone for the year. In March, railway workers downed tools in one of the most bitterly contested strikes in the country's history. Clashes between police and workers left several strikers dead. Twice Cosatu House was sealed off and searched.
The workers were never aware of the real realities of what is happening. And the SARU strike made them aware, because then the workers could see, but now they're even calling the police out to come and attack our workers. And these workers are complaining about worker issues. Why are they getting the police out to come and attack us? This is a thing between us and management. Why is the police involved in it?
They've put up a showdown with us, and we are prepared. We haven't got guns. We haven't got all the powerful artillery they've got. But our spirit will live on. We'll show them.
Protesting the white election and the attacks on Cosatu, more than 3 million people observed a stay-away call on May the 5th and 6th. As the impact of the action was sinking in, Cosatu headquarters was rocked by 2 massive bomb blasts which effectively destroyed the building.
Now I'll fight my whole collective.
Cosatu's strength, however, was not in its head office. The strike wave spread to other industries, even affecting postal workers. After 3 months, SATS was forced to re-employ all the railway strikers and begin dealing with SARU. This victory changed the nature of unionism in the public sector forever. The toughest test was yet to come. In August, the miners struck.
In the first place, it was the biggest strike ever experienced in the history of our country, where you had 340,000 miners out on strike for a period of 3 weeks. Such a strike has never been repeated. The other importance of it is that we took on and challenged the commanding heights of the economy of this country.
I think, inevitably, the black union movement had to establish itself, demonstrate its muscle, demonstrate its power and competence in collective bargaining. Perhaps also, to some extent, learn the limits of its power.
The boss's intention when that strike started was to eliminate and completely destroy the NUM. In that respect, we emerged victorious because they did not achieve their primary goal of crushing the NUM.
In the end, people only share power when they can't get their own way on their own terms. And they've got to be brought to a realization that whether they like the other side or not, they have to deal with them. And I think that cut absolutely both ways in the decade of the 80s. And I think both unions and employers had to be brought to that harsh realization of interdependence.
The NUM suffered quite severely with some 50,000 miners being retrenched. It showed that as a federation we weren't really geared to effectively back up and give the kind of solidarity that was expected and required on the part of those who were engaging the employers at the time.
I think for all its costs and all its problems, the year 1987 was actually one of the key years of finally building Cosatu. So in that respect, it put Cosatu through a kind of test of fire, and we came out of it burnt but alive, and that was important. For the bosses, I think, yeah, it did give them a fright. And what they did was to attempt to change the law to our detriment. But the success of building Cosatu meant that we were able to counter that effectively. So I think the balance of power tilted to a more fair balance. I think employers, the more far-sighted, realized that this is a union movement here to stay. You've got to talk to them on in a relationship of some degree of equality.
In September 1987, government, under pressure from employers, proposed changes to the Labor Relations Act.
It was both an attack on the trade union movement at a political level and an economic level. In terms of the strike action one saw in 1987, it was very clear that employers were pushing the government towards enacting labor law that basically emasculated the trade union movement.
We believe that it is a good bill which does represent an advance in our labour law, and which certainly is not an effort at labour or union bashing. That is the last thing that it is.
Well, obviously, it was rejected. Not even one affiliate was accommodative of that act that was amended, and hence the campaigns in Cosatu.
I think there was a recognition we would have to broaden the base of opposition against the government on the issue of the Labour Relations Act. And the logical place to seek those alliances was with NACTU and the independent unions that existed in the country. The consequence of that was the calling of those worker summits that we had.
Firstly, it was quite clear that the workers here are determined to take action of some nature to protest against this bill. We need to go out and prepare the community as a whole. We need to go out and prepare the democratic movement as a whole for an action.
We can mobilize the masses in a broad range of ways, but the only open way that is there for us now to voice our anger is through a stay away. I mean, we cannot vote the government out because we don't have the power to vote.
The overwhelming response to the Cosatu NACTU call for a 3-day stay away convinced employers and the state to seriously consider worker objections to the LRA. The campaign of mass action continued alongside negotiations with employer organizations. Agreement was finally reached in September 1990 around broad principles of the LRA.
There is no doubt that Cosatu, in fact, was in the center in trying to bring all organizations together and try to work out a program in which we are going to engage the state.
Pressure was put on the apartheid government to finally realize that the only solution for our country was in the release of the political prisoners, our leaders, the unbanning of the ANC, and also starting the process that they have now embarked upon.
The defiance campaign ignited the country. Thousands of people took to the streets, forcing the government to address their demands. After the release of Nelson Mandela and the unbanning of political organizations, Cosatu is now re-examining its role as a trade union federation.
We are not content as workers to have the vote and have freedom and have no food on our tables. And what we are demanding is an approach that combines both freedom we want at a political level with the freedom we are demanding at an economic level. And democracy must be seen not just at a political level, but democracy must permeate the very fabric of the society, particularly in terms of the needs of people.
We must retain our independent positions because the government must govern the whole country. It doesn't necessarily, even if it's sympathetic, do everything that the union movement wants it to do. So in Cosatu we've been talking a lot about keeping the strength of mass organizations, or sometimes people say strengthening civil society. And I think we would argue, many of us would argue in Cosatu, that the real strength of a democracy in the future will be a very healthy balance between strong civil society and a state that has mass support.
We know that on a number of issues right now, Cosatu and the ANC are able to reach agreement. But in time, even if there is an ANC government, there may well be a time when we will differ. Once the ANC is in power, we will be able to join the ANC where we agree, and where we do not agree, we will make it very clear to the ANC as a government that we do not agree, and we are going to put pressure on an ANC government to ensure that the rights of workers remain prominent and are treated with the respect that they deserve, and that workers must be regarded as being the most important citizens in the country.
I believe that nowhere in the world one can really make a clear division between labor matters and politics. The members of trade unions are also people involved in politics. You have had that in South Africa. When the National Party came into power in 1948, they had strong support from the trade unions then. So one would be naive, I believe, to think that it's possible that to divorce trade unions completely from politics. So one expects that unions would talk politics.